case study that Piedmont Triad Regional Council did for us this year. And Matt Reese is here from the council, and he'll be presenting, but I thought it might be good, to just sort of go through a summary of how we got to where we are today. And the pay study that the council did and Matt headed up was approved in our current year budget, and we gave the authorization to proceed to Matt in April of this year. A kickoff meeting with the town staff was held in June of this year. And then in July, the staff was provided with the acronym is PDQ, Position Description Questionnaire. They were all interviewed in August, and then the town got an update in September that the benchmarking and market analysis would take place over the coming months. In November, Drew and I and Brad did a virtual meeting with Matt to go over the findings, and then based on those findings, we have been working since late November to try to get Matt over here to be able to present the findings, and literally, and probably everybody can relate to this time of year that we've got a lot more on our schedule, and so today was the one window that we had that we could get Matt over here in person to present, so that's why we went ahead and scheduled that today instead of doing it at the council meeting on Tuesday night. So we are grateful that he is here, and Matt, fire away.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate your time and letting me come and present to you. Really, what this is routine maintenance, and it may seem somewhat more exceptional in it, but this is the sort of thing that we suggest agencies get involved with and do about every 3 to 5 years to maintain. Getting into the process of it, let me first make sure we're where we need to be. That ultimately what we're going to be talking about is increasing spend on your labor costs at $37,000 to move from 80% market position to a 92% market position. The options that we looked at seem to fit in the budget. So let's go ahead and move to the market position. So that's certainly what we want to be thinking about. Is what we're here to talk about. That's the reason for the meeting. However, the process that got us here, as Mayor was talking about, is important to understand. This really is sort of a routine maintenance piece. This is taking car in for a tune-up. This is getting the HVAC mechanic to come out and take a look at our heating and air system. Right? So we're aligning it along a variety of principles. So this is from the American Compensation Association, and this is the process that you all do. So really the process itself has a lot of validity to it. It has a lot of value. And the hard work of all of the process is what was done by your employees. So your employees sat down and took a questionnaire and said, this is my job. This is what I do. I spend 10% of the time doing this, 20% of the time doing this. Here are the problems that I encounter. Here's how I go about solving this problem. Here's the knowledge, skills, abilities that I need. And so all of that is in this written process. So we call that a position description questionnaire in our process. And then at that point, we can break down into 2 areas, either a market-driven process or one that has some internal validity and relationships. Usually in the public sector, we default to the job content. Actually here in your organization, given the fact that we have 3 positions, it's really pretty evenly split between those 2. But usually, the deference is to go with the job content or the internal relationship over the market not being in the first position, the job content being in the first position. Regardless of the sort of methodology you use on that to say, what are the jobs we have, and how are these jobs internally related? We land back at a reconciliation. What's the market? What do we observe from here in the organization? And And then ultimately that leads to an establishment of a pay plan and assignment of classes to grades. So that's really what you have. And really for the first time in school administration, you've got this establishment of a pay plan. So really, the big things that are being accomplished in this is that you have captured the work the incumbents in those positions have completed out, for lack of a better term, their job description, right? And then you're establishing at the end of that process, what's the pay structure? Those are really the big elements, right? There's costs involved to move from where we are currently to be within this establishment of more competitive. But really, the administrative work is that capturing what those jobs are and putting it into this. So, I want to talk just sort of quickly about market, because we're going to throw that term around, and we've got obviously a variety of ends when it comes to market. This is looking at the macro. I've got a couple of slides for you on that, just to sort of set in context. I'm going to be telling you things that I'm sure you already know. It's an incredibly competitive labor market. That's really focused. So what this is showing the job seekers in blue to job openings in orange in the Piedmont Triad Prosperity surrounding us where we are, right? And then when we look at that, we can see that there's been this relationship where there have been more job seekers to job openings. But then we inverted that relationship in 21, around June, April of 21. And then we back and normalized that relationship back in 24. And so you can see that it's been different, right? And basically we are still really competitive at 1.3 job seekers per opening. That is way more narrow than this traditional frame that we've had, which is down here. This is for state information. They give us a longer longitude, so it helps us see what that relationship is. But it's really been 3 to 1. You can see during periods of the Great Recession, during other periods that there have been even more of a gap in terms of those relationships. But we inverted the curve at one point, and now we are still in a much tighter space. So we're just in a real unknown area, a really different area for the last 4 years or so than where we've been historically. So that's really put competition, as I'm sure you're aware, in all kinds of areas. Perhaps the restaurant that you go to has changed their hours. A variety of things have happened because we're just in this really tight, very different labor market. How we've responded to that at the municipal and county level in public compensation is this. This is a survey that was put out by the League and the Association of County Commissioners last year, giving an idea of what's the prediction for what's happening now, what's going to happen in this fiscal year 26. And so you see that the state average there at the bottom is 5.5%. You can see what those regional averages are for each of those areas. What I can tell you is these are phenomenally high numbers. That for most of my career, this would be somewhere in the 2 to 4% range. So to see something like this is really exceptional. For the last couple of years, it's been even higher. It's been 6 to 10 to 12. And so these numbers are just incredibly exceptional for the place that we're in. And how that's looked sort of over a longer period of time from the same survey instrument that you can see here what the average COLA are, and the dark blue, the average American, the teal, light blue, and the teal gives you an idea of CPI running along with that, right? So you can see there is some correlation with the CPI on all of that. But you can see this is the normal range, right? It's in this 2 to 3% range that we would be for most of the So then you can see what's happening in the last couple of years. So again, the reason I say that is just things have changed. Things have changed in terms of where we would normally be able to recruit and retain employees. That environment has become much more competitive. So what that looks like when we start translating all that macro down to an individual level, right? So this is for a position of town clerk. When we looked at those, we're looking at apples to apples comparisons, right, of where those jobs are. So for the position town clerk, really the benchmark comparisons for us are financial support positions. That's a big bulk of what that job is doing. So it needs to be the driver for where we are. What you can see in the blue lines there is that's the entry level for all of those. That's going to be our primary point of comparison. We need to be sure that our recommendations for the structure of compensation is aligning with the minimum of the market. And then the orange is the actual average, what folks are making in those roles right there. So what we're suggesting, based on the market information that you see, we're trying to sort of tie into that average line, the second one down from Swepsonville, is to establish a market of 47 for minimum and then 61,000 for target. In this concept that we're going to show you, that target becomes important. What's the market average? What's that target that we want to move employees to over time? As they show performance, as they show contributions to the organization, we want to be in line with where that target is. Overall, that market average to the target is 93%. What you're going to see in the recommendations for your classifications here is to lag behind this identified market. Obviously, you can see Mebane, the North Carolina average of municipalities your size, Hillsborough, Alamance, Graham, Jamestown, Chapel Hill, Hillsborough. Hillsborough had 2 different classes that were competitive with this position. So when we look at that, we're looking at a geographic market, and we're looking at a market that's larger than where you are. So then therefore, we feel that it's appropriate to lag behind that market by this 7%. So that's what you're going to consistently see in all of these recommendations, right? This is the labor market that you compete in. I don't think it would be good to turn a blind eye to those competitors, because those are going to be the ones who are likely to hire and have other positions that folks would be interested in, right? But I think it is appropriate to lag behind. But that's a judgment. You understand that it's a professional judgment that is being executed in lagging and how far behind to lag. So you just, on all of these, they're going to be set up similarly. Got 2 more graphs to look at. But for quick reference, you see the blue and the orange horizontal and vertical line, and those give you just sort of a quick eye for where we're recommending and how that relates to that average for those classes. So for your service operations manager, what we're saying is establish a range for that of 50 to 65. Again, we're going to be lagging behind on the market average to the target, 93%. And then this is going to be compared to utility supervisor positions. That's a pretty strong comparison for this, but with those utility supervisor positions, those are the folks who are responsible for the utility system. Right? They're the ones who are usually certified in those areas. They're the ones who are making sure that all of the compliance that you have to have is being done. Now, you all are obviously doing that through some contract support, but ultimately that's the work that's being given, right? That's the consequence of error that is being assigned to that service operations manager position, right? So again, you can see where we're lining up. Again, your minimums, your blue trailing just slightly behind that. You can see your orange trailing just slightly behind that. Then for town administrator, we've got a minimum of 92 and 119.6 is where the target is. This one we're 92% on that. And again, the comparison here is not to other managers. The comparison is going to be to finance and assistant town manager positions in these. Right? So if it's a really strong town manager, assistant town manager position, with other reports, we're going to be looking more towards the finance positions. But with your town administrator position, this is the individual who's responsible comprehensively for being sure that all of organizational compliance, particularly financial organizational compliance, is being administered, keeping within the rails on that. Again, you can see where those blue and orange lines are intersecting, and that you're slightly behind that. This one's trailing a little bit more than that 92 than the 93 for the other 2 classes. So that's an observation of the market and where we're going with the structure, right? So we've established what those minimums are, what those targets are. How that looks in terms of the pay plan itself is this. That you'll remember from our first class there that we had a minimum of 47 and we had the target of 61. Those are the blue and the orange lines there. What this pay plan is this was no good idea. I've never had an original idea. All the ideas are stolen. So this one I'm stealing from the fine folks at Greenberg who stole it and a Hay consulting group. This is called a Hay to target, refer to that as the developmental range, right? And then we're gonna have planned progress with performance, organizational performance, to move towards that target. This is what the minimum is with 1 DI, with 2 DIs, with 3 DIs, etc. Right? And so the idea is I come as I gain more competency. You would start me at the 47, but then you're progressing me to the 61. So this is this planned progression, perhaps annually, with all of those, with that amount that is given, right? It's a fixed dollar amount, right? That is being given to each of those. So then, what happens when you get to the target range is that the target, we're saying from target on out to maximum, is a performance range, is how it's referred to in this system, right? And then the idea is we're not progressing typically beyond target towards maximum unless there's been some really specific thing that's been established for the employee to accomplish a work plan, then you meet or exceed that work plan, and then you move beyond that, right? Now there's a variety of flavors to this. It could be that when you get to target, that my salary stays the same, but this developmental increase that I've been given is given to me annually, but it's not in addition to base, right? It's only when I have that work plan and I've achieved that work plan that I'm moving out beyond that. So again, this is a philosophical concept that you'll want to be sure that you affirm and direct to town staff, right? Part of that is to flip part of the employment relationship, right? This portion of the pay range, the developmental portion of the pay range, the incumbency is on the employer. We've had good organizational performance, we continue to have growth, we have availability of budget, so we're going to make those increments towards that 61,000. What I get you to, at this point, was usually a relationship with market. We're going to stop. We're going to slow it down. Now the relationship, the burden becomes on the employee to say, hey, let's have a conversation, let's figure out what the work plan is. At this point, I've developed competency over this period of time, right? I've been here perhaps 8 years now, right? So what is it that I can bring to the table and say, okay, well, these are the things I think I can do next year, these are the things that I can do as I develop my work plan. And if I achieve that, let's talk about how I move forward beyond that part. This is the philosophical concept behind this. Again, remember, a couple of things that are happening in this study. One, you're establishing what all of the work is for those 3 positions. We captured that in the process of the questionnaire. Now we're establishing a structure of compensation to be administered long term. Right? So those are sort of the inferences that are behind this minimum, target, maximum, and the progression that would be along in that. For the study, we need to take that to a granular level. And so for the study, what we've done is instead of looking at all of these in one developmental increase, one annual increase, we've taken it down to the granular level of monthly. The reason for that is if we pick the month, then there's winners and losers, right? If we pick April as the time, and if my anniversary date is May, then I've lost that. So what we do is let's measure it all the way down to decimal points on months of service, and then let's have a factor of month of service for that. Then we also want to establish a cap, because again, if this is the performance range for the plan, then we need to say, okay, look, we're not in a position to measure that kind of performance. We're not in a position to move that, but what we want to do is establish a cap for the purposes of the study to say where that is. And so how that works out is if we had 100 months of service at this monthly factor of 147, that's this 14.7 value, add that to our minimum here, and then we get the proposed salary of 61.7. So that would be how that comes about. What's the proposed salary? We're adopting this plan that directs where we're going, and then that comes up with where we need to be in relationship to that, right? And then for the target, simply what we took was to take that target times 113% to give us the target of 69,054. Why 113%? Because if we look at we're roughly 7% behind the market at 93% more. Then the market may have moved according to the survey that you saw at 6%. So the 6 and 7 added together is 13. So that looks like on the outward edge where we put things based on the data that you've got. So this is the structure behind where all our recommendations are coming from. So you want to be sure that you would nod and say, yeah, we like that structure, that looks like that would work. This is what we recommend for smaller agencies. You're not gonna have a robust, HR plan here with, someone who's doing training for, how point factor systems should go for your performance system. So this is a very simple tool to use. It's a tool we recommend for agencies a lot larger than you as well, but it is a really good tool for folks who don't have that full component to be able to measure their performance systems with. So here's how we get to this 37.2, right? So if we look at, here's where the entry is in blue for each of those positions, and then we look at using that formula that we just saw. You see where the orange is for each of the positions. And then the gray, where it's available, is showing you what the target is. If one position is exceeding the established target for that range, but we're doing that in that same line up to the cap. So you can see where administrative lands, you can see where service operations manager lands, and town clerk as well. On this, you can see that we're behind those targets, we're remaining behind those full market targets that are at 7 to 8% behind the observed average for those classes. So that's a lot of information in a short time. Happy to go back to any slides for you and kind of talk through this further. But what questions do you have for me at this point? Questions?
You're saying this is normally done every, 3 to 5 years
That-
in municipalities?
Yeah, that answer that I gave is back in this land. Right. So, I've had more, I've been doing it for 30 years now, the bulk of my career every 3 to 5 years. In the last 5 years, I've had more and more clients say, we're gonna do this much quicker. We're gonna study all of ours every year.
Because the market.
Because the market can change, right? So I still think from an organization your size and where you are, I think my 3 to 5 answer is right, but I have a much larger caveat to that than I would have before. And again, if all of a sudden things change, if you added staff, organizationally something changes, don't wait 5 years to have that stuff.
So you're saying also with these positions, the starting range would move accordingly with what the market says?
Yes, yeah. And so what you can do annually is if you looked at this, you would say, all right, let's update this as we're looking at what we're doing for our employees. If we're maintaining this, and this is roughly, which I think will come out to be about 3.5% change down here. As you move up, that percentage is much less. It's flat, so understand that. But if we're looking at about a 3 to 5% change, or 3.5% change here, then maybe we move the whole entire structure to 3%, right? This becomes 3% higher, this becomes 3% higher, this becomes 3% higher. You still need to divide that by 8, because just moving your developmental increase is not going to work. But move your 3 value points above. And then the idea is that when another study comes in 5 years, if you've been building in some increase, right? If you've been putting in a little oil to the car throughout those years, you take it in the mechanic, it's not going to tell you to run on empty, right? So you want to do some adjustments that seem simple. I usually side on the conservative side of making the structure adjustments. Do it less for the structure than you are for your current employees. And then that way, when the study's done, hopefully there's not. Yeah, the best study in the world is one that there's no implementation cost. That comes back and says, you're right where you need to be, there's no further adjustments that need to be made.
Does that make sense? Other questions?
And just for clarity, the comp study that you performed is based on the administrator or the assistant town administrator for each of those other municipalities. Is that
Right, right. Well, it's, yes. What we're looking at here is, as many finance really as we are assistant town managers. This one was an ATM, this one is an ATM, but the rest of those are finance, right? We're not talking necessarily about a finance director. We're talking about maybe the accounting lead, right? The fiscal lead. budget need for those, right? And so I think this is a fairly conservative market, given that we're not talking about CEOs, right? In that, that's not the role that we're benchmarked at all.
Other questions? Comments?
Well, thank you all. I've enjoyed working with the town staff, and they've been really good. Bonnie Tatum, as the analyst, give her appropriate credit. She's the one that came in, worked with it, identified the class comparison for us on behalf of all of PTURC, and particularly Ron and myself. Thank you. We appreciate your service, and thank you for being on the regional council.
Thank you.
Keep it.
Pop that back up there. There's one thing, I didn't know whether you had anything else you wanted to present, but I did want to go back to that 93% and the cost associated with getting our staff up to that 93%. So we talked through that, make sure that
Sure.
that's, if you don't mind doing that, Matt, that's.
Sure. Essentially, what you're doing is the 93 is establishing, well, there's two 93s. The 93 that you have is your relationship to the market, and then when we look at the actual average of your incumbents compared to the market, you're currently at 80%. Not talking about structure, taking the structure away. We're just talking about salaries now and the salaries that would be proposed.
And you said we're at 80%
You're at
now.
80% now,
Okay.
and moving to 92.
Okay.
So that's $37,000 you spend, which you have to do. Moves you from that 80% ratio comparison to 92%. So what you're doing is you're saying, we really like to get things as competitive as we can, instead of trying to do that in a slower movement. Let's do that as quickly as we can in this budget. Every organization I've ever worked with, that's been the goal. That they've said, all right, let's get to a competitive position as quickly as we can. And you all are in the position that you're able to do that. There's a lot of other local governments that, quite frankly, I'll work with that can't. They're not able to. That's their goal. I'd like to go ahead and move to that. But there's just, Titanic is too big, and they can't move it fast enough to get to that goal, right? So you all are in the enviable position of being able to move in that direction.
Do you find that most entities or other government, do you see them doing part of their payroll or the whole payroll?
So the bulk of my work has been to study organizations in 1/3 increments. So we worked with the city of High Point most of my career. We're getting ready to perhaps start a project with Winston-Salem, and they do 1/3 studies. So almost all of the large local governments are going to do a 1/3 study. We're going to study fire this year, police the next year, public services, 1/3. Yes. Yeah. And so it's intentional to break up costs now. It's also intentional that we're not capturing the market for everybody at the same time, right? So that completely kind of falls out the window.
I'm
But
sorry, Brad.
It's, I'm sorry. It's, and I can send it to you. It's that issue that's budgetary, right? We can't turn the Titanic in that, right? If I'm a county, I can't afford to do the sheriff's office, public health, and DSS all in 1 year, right? I've got to break it up. I'd like to be able to do it all, but I can't. And there are some organizations that I work with that the other side of that is that we're in such a hole, we're so far behind the market, we've neglected to do maintenance that we should
work with counties?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, did you do the one for Alamance County?
Not their most recent one, but I have done studies for them in the past.
Okay, because I was curious, I think I've heard them talk about they had to get theirs up to whatever percentage of market rate they wanted to be. They had to do it over, they had to phase that in over several years, I think, to be able to do it.
Basically, the first probably 10 years that we worked with the city of High Point is very competitive there now, but when the work was started in 1992, they were not. So it took a decade to get to that. And a lot of other work we had to do.
So at this point, for us to go, make sure I understand this right, to go from 80%, where it's at 80% of the market right now, to go to 92, 93%, there's going to be that cost of what, $37,280. And then, I think that there's a recommendation that we add 18% to that to cover the benefits,
Yeah.
right?
All the costs I've been talking to you about are direct comparable, so it's not, there's no added for that. So you would, yes, you would, if you change the salaries, then you have to change your contributions for FICA and your contributions to the retirement system.
Gotcha. So then if we do that, that takes that 37, I think this is what Brad sent out yesterday. 37,280 takes us about 44,363 to be exact to get to that point. We have, there's what, $70,000 or so in the budgeted for this. Okay. So, I guess the question is now, what are you all's thoughts on, one, I mean, we need to do something, obviously. And two, if we do, there's a feeling that we do, then what, where along that spectrum should we fall?
So the other thing that you would want to probably do at that same point, if I may, is just to also authorize that pay plan. To say that the structure that we saw for those is the one.
Okay.
So by implementing the pay plan, then you're going to be giving instructions to the administrator how to improve the pay plan. Specifically spend the $44,000 to implement.
You said we had how much budget?
72, I think, was budgeted. 71, I think 71. Okay, I'm sorry, 71, so.
So there's 97 on the budget.
You're all right.
Right. Matt also talked a little bit about, some that you shared with Drew and Brad and me in that Zoom last month is, I was talking earlier about peer group, trying to find out, I'm always curious what peer group institutions are doing.
Yes.
As maybe some sort of a guideline of what we're doing. I think you shared with us that for a town this size that operates, the utilities as well as the administration of the town, that doing it with 3 people is, the world is leaner, maybe a lot leaner than other municipalities.
I've not done this analysis, so I don't know. But my guess is that if you looked at your per capita employment cost, that your per capita employment cost is much lower than that because you only have employees are expensive. There's no way around that, right? You have to pay fire. So they're expensive. The advantage is that you're able to have that as that work that's being done 2,080 hours a year, right? So the issue is, what do we want to contract for? What do we want to employ for, right? I think it's a good strategy for smaller local governments to look at that contracting for work and then having employees that are competent to oversee, be sure assistance on your financials, on all of that, as the liability of the town. Consultant, contractor, service provider, has their work to do, but they may be liable to you, and liable to the entity that you're filing. You're liable to. Having that, once you've got competent employees that can be sure that those things are being done, then most of the driving around being done, this is a really good space for smaller local governments to get into. I work with a lot of local governments, smaller local governments, that have, part of it is that they developed that capacity when they had more industry in town, when they had that, and then now they're trying to figure out what do we do with all that. Do we use all the parts and pieces? It's hard to get rid of something once you make those investments. So then for the 3 employees that you have, we're one of those positions to matriculate to another employer, then you've got a third of your workforce, you've got a third of your operations that are perhaps hamstrung at that point in time. Right? Certainly you've got the contractors that are doing it, but it becomes really hard. So then being sure that you're in a very competitive market position seems like a good strategy to me. Right? It seems like that would make sense to put that there. I think, again, overall your labor cost is going to be smaller. I guess my assumption. I've done that piece of analysis, but my assumption is that your labor cost is going to be smaller than others that are in that. And then looking to this oversight of contractors, at least from my anecdotal look at that for a variety of folks who are even larger than you all are, it's been a pretty good fit. Whether they're contracting out for fire, they're contracting out for recreation, they're contracting out for law enforcement, all of those things are a pretty good way to operate in a small public services office. You all are really unique in that space so that you have an ownership in those utilities and you're contracting those, right? There's a variety of folks that, all the folks in Forsyth County are part of the Utilities Commission, right? So the Utility Commission owns all of that. That's a little bit different relationship. So we've talked pros and cons on that, I'm sure. But it's a good place, I think, for you to be.
Other questions? Comments?
How many hours a week does Blaine work? The only day he's off is Monday, so it's what, 36 an hour. Oh, sorry, 32 days, 32.
What we did for our analysis on that is take it down to an hourly level, so that everything's calculated out at the hourly. You've got an annual figure, but that's taking it down to an hourly, and then bruising it up based on the hours, the budgeted hours.
So try to get apples to apples comparison.
Well, you know, he has his certification, that's worth something. That's more how you put a value on it.
Yes.
You know.
How we put the value on it was comparing it to those utility supervisor positions that also have similar kinds of certifications.
Well, I want to ask you guys a question. You know, I've spent last week trying to get my head around this thing and you know, figured it all out and I guess it looks ask you all, is if we're at 80% now, philosophically, are we at a point as council members to go ahead and make that move now to get them up to 92, 93% of the market? Which, you know, I mean, that's a lot of money. So philosophically, I mean, where are you guys on that?
Well, my opinion on the thing is that we hired these guys to do that, we paid them money to do it. Kinda like most stuff. You go to the doctor and he tells you to do this and you don't do it. You know what I'm saying?
I'm with you 100%. But I just want to have that discussion now because I think we're about to make a big step. And I think it's an important one. I just want to make sure that we're all, you know, philosophically in line with one another. And if we're not, now's the time to talk. Contracts.
I think if we weren't doing as well as we were in our town, it'd be a different conversation. I think the work that they've done to help bring us to the point where we're at with our town does deserve some recognition. It should be at the right time.
Well, I do too. I mean, I think this has been, I mean, hindsight being 20/20, maybe this is something we should have done years ago. But we've done it. And I think the thing that the one of the epiphanies I had in this is that, I was
His name is Carl, yeah.
talking around with this together and saying, who are the comps going to be? Who are the comps going to be?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he called me, I told him.
the comps are not just towns with 3,000 people population. It's comps that Amy can get in the car and drive to Mebane. She could drive to Chapel Hill. She go to Hillsborough. I mean, that where we live, it's not just other small towns. It's also the municipalities that are close enough by that. And I would imagine, I think all three of our employees are people that would be in demand. Because they're doing a great job. And, maybe we've been lucky so far that, and something that Matt said in that Zoom, he said again this morning, you lose one of them, you lose a third of your staff. And, I think, when we went through that search for Brad, after Raymond left, I think we got to pick the litter. I have no doubt about that. But the litter wasn't real big.
One of the things too is I know your comparisons were with other municipalities or other towns. But you got in the back of your head, you got to take into account too, you're competing against general industry and everything that's out there.
True. That's true. Yeah. True.
Because Brad's good with numbers.
Yes.
So, there's lots of jobs out there other than a municipal government that hires people. And Amy.
Yes.
So,
Paul, I guess there's not a legal angle aspect maybe to this and what we're looking at, but your thoughts?
I think, first of all, it's great to do the study. It gives you some objective data to go on, and it's not just making an evaluation on the individual. You do that too, but at least you look at it from a big picture point of view. competition is anywhere you can commute to. You know, I run a business too. You know, we hire paralegals and staff, and we compete against Greensboro, really to Raleigh for us. And you think of those as being really different markets, but if you can get your car and drive to them, you're competing with them, and that's what you're looking at. I would agree also on a municipal level. I think, you know, two of the key things that I heard was really trying to align job duties with role. You know, the easy way to do it would have been to say, hey, let's compare the town administrator to the town manager at Burlington or the county or whatever. But those are really different jobs, obviously both in scope and otherwise. But also, the other part is how much money are you spending on your people per capita, right? You gotta have two. You really have to have an admin and a clerk no matter what. And the third role, you're either gonna hire it or you're gonna outsource it, and you're paying for it either way. And in any town, you're gonna have at least 3 positions. Some have 2, and they outsource that role. But I would say, knowing the other towns that I work with, your per capita expense on employees is got to be towards the bottom, because you haven't added a bunch of roles that, quite frankly, maybe you haven't needed or you have needed, but been very judicious and not over hiring. And that's not true of every town. So those would just be my observations. You definitely have good people. Honestly, what these bigger cities look for is people with experience in these roles, and that's ultimately your competition is Mebane and Burlington, Graham to some degree as well, and those bigger cities looking to pick off your employees that are in this role and have experience doing it. So it's always going to be the case.
Do our guests have any questions or comments?
I did previously, but the gentleman has answered them all, and your questions have answered them as well. Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for coming. Okay, well, I'm gonna take a run here trying to put a motion together, and those of you who are more learned than me, which is everybody in the room, jump in and tell me where I'm getting off the rails here. I'd like to make a motion that, and I think, Matt, this is reflective of what you were talking about, that we adopt the structure that has been presented for our compensation of employees. Would be one part of that motion. The second part of it is that we go ahead and get our employees 92 or 93. What's the noise? Is it somewhere in between 92 and 93?
Yes.
All right. But to get our employees up to that 92, 93% level, along with not only the salary increases, but the cost of the benefits as well. And that I don't know if the motion needs to have specific numbers in there.
No, I think you're adopting the plan and the percentages, and then it's the applications as
Okay, all right. And that, does that cover everything? And I'd like to make that in form of motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. Motion carries 5-0. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the scope of our special meeting. Matt, I thank you for coming and for everybody to be here today. And do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you.
So, okay, so, I noticed that,